exploring theology, doctrine, and all of the fascinating subjects in between, broadcasting from an undisclosed location. Dead Men Walking starts now. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dead Men Walking Podcast. We appreciate you listening, telling a friend, sharing the podcast with a friend. It's the only way we grow. Also going to dmwpodcast.com and checking out our merch. Your purchase supports this show and helps us bring glory to God. Also, I'd be remiss if we didn't mention that this episode is brought to you by Jacob Supply. He's a brother in the Lord. He's local right here in Michigan. He brings you quality building products at wholesale pricing. Jacobsupply.com has everything from roofings and buildings and appliances. What he does is he goes and buys at wholesale, passes that on to you. All new products for 30, 40, 50% off. Even if you live in the tri-state area and it's a couple hours away, come on up, check him out. You're sure to get a deal. That's jacobsupply.com. Also, our buddies over at reformsage.com. Love Nick and these guys. T-shirts, coasters, wooden bookmarks, stickers, anything that you want to fulfill that reformed stage cage in you. You need to go check it out. He's got great stuff. He also owns reformedroasters.com. So if you need a dark Kelvin roast, make sure you go get your coffee fix over at reformedroasters.com. Thanks so much, guys, for sponsoring the show. Now that we have the business out of the way, I'm excited about this one because we have a guest that is on that. We're going to be talking about something different. He is an award-winning author. He is a science fiction writer, has a bundle of books underneath his belt. We're going to get to that. He was also featured on Jimmy Fallon, and Jimmy had this to say about him. Listen to this.
Oh, this book is Amish Vampires in Space. Do we need yet another Amish Vampire Space book? Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt.
Oh, so the headline grabbed it, but yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have Kerry Nietz in the house today. How are you, Kerry?
I'm great. Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, so we have a common friend and you were suggested for the podcast. And I said, yeah, we got to get this guy on because I remember that clip going viral quite a few years ago. And I think it was just a thing on Jimmy Fallon where it was like, it's a unique title, right? Amish Vampires in Space. And I think most of the reviews I've read on this too, is it grabs people. I read one review, which was extremely positive. And he goes, the only reason I picked it up was because of the cover and the name. And I like the genre, science fiction. So your branding on those series, because I think Amish Werewolves in Space you also have, and a few others that we'll talk about, the branding is just genius. I absolutely love you taking those genres and putting them all together and doing it. But before we get into that, can you just give our listeners, I don't know, a couple-minute bio on a little bit about you, what you do, and kind of how you got into writing?
Sure. I'm Kerry Nietz. I've been actually a believer and also a science fiction fan since I was, really young, like 8 maybe, and and just grew up reading it and watching it, and it was just kind of fun for me. So I worked at Microsoft for a number of years as well. I actually went to college for computer science, so I kind of have that technical background, science fiction kind of coming alive there, and just always wanted to write though. So I would be scribbling things, sort of on the side, and when the opportunity presented itself, I sort of took advantage of it and started writing. So I have a dozen novels now, I think, and a nonfiction book and some short stories and even some entries in some devotionals and whatnot as well. So yeah, over 1 million words in print, I guess. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Where can people find those works? Do you have a website, or do they just go to Amazon, or where do you want them to go?
Sure, they're all on Amazon and other booksellers online, but Nietz.com is my website, so that's pretty easy to remember. Nietz.com.
Okay,
I'll get you there, or search for Amish Vampires Space. You'll find me. So
there's more than enough hits on Google if you type that in. Absolutely. So are you doing that full time? Are you a full-time author?
Yeah. I mean, I'm also a father and managing a house and stuff here, but that's sort of my main focus. So
okay. So what gave you that idea? I know we're gonna focus on the in space for a couple of these. I know you've got some new stuff out too, and we'll get to that. Sure. But as a believer and as a Christian, and this is a Christian podcast, so to speak, we have a biblical and reformed worldview. You see those titles, and the first thing I think is horror and sex and all these different things. And there's not really a space for a book that can mash up those types of genres and do it in a way that's honoring and interesting. But it seems like you have. So what gave you that idea, first and foremost, to write a series where all those type of genres are intertwined?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of an interesting story. My publisher at the time, back in 2013, 2014, he would go to all these writing conventions, and all the other publishers would be looking for Amish fiction, because that's like, I don't know if most people know that in your listenership, but it's like a big niche, and sells millions of copies a year. And he would be like the only speculative guy there, like the only guy looking for fantasy and science fiction. So he would jokingly say, the only Amish I'm looking for is if it's something like Amish vampires in space. That was this joke title that he threw out. Well, time went by, and he sent out this mock cover to all the authors saying, and it's actually, you can see it in my book. It's on the second or third page there. It had a planet, and there's clearly Amish vampires in it, and there's a casket, and kind of got laughing about it. And I was like, someone should write that book, because I think the title alone would intrigue people.
Sure.
I don't know. It seems kind of campy. I don't know if I'm the guy to write it. And I was actually in the middle of writing another trilogy at the time. But I just thought it was a good idea. And then I don't know if it was, waking up in the morning or early in the morning, or, bad reader or what, but I had this idea of how the Amish might get into space and become vampires and not have it be campy. And so I started writing on it. I got 30,000 words into it, and I was like, this is kind of working. And so I sent him email and told him, hey, guess what I'm doing? And when he got done laughing, he said, okay, if it's any good, I'll publish it. So the final book, I think, was over 130,000 words. So I had a lot more writing to do then, but he liked it and published it, and sort of the rest is history at that point. So
did it do pretty well? I know you have won other awards for other novels that you've written. Was it a pretty well received book overall?
It was, and the cover got, like, when the cover got released, that kind of blew up on social media. Just this just kind of unusual thing. And then when the book is self-released, it mentioned by the Washington Post. Dave Barry, kind of famous commentator, mentioned it. Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, a lot of places that had never been mentioned before. So it's definitely a very cool thing. And you mentioned the Jimmy Fallon thing. When that happened, I had just started using Twitter a little bit, and it was so fun to just watch those words be said throughout the world. And it really was a worldwide thing. Like I bet I counted, 12 different languages, 7 different countries at one point. It was kind of incredible. So
right. It's like, hey, don't tweet about it. Just go buy it. Help me out.
Right. So it's very cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, the first thing I wanted to ask you too was, so is it just because you're interested in science fiction that you write science fiction? It sounds like you have some other genres that you delve into too, but is it just an interest, or are you trying to make any type of points within that genre? Because, full disclosure, I haven't read the entire book. I read some excerpts. I've read some reviews of that particular one. And the common theme was, you would think this was just pure fantasy. And as a science fiction geek, I'm more of the Star Trek guy than the Star Wars, because Star Wars feels very, fantasy, to where Star Trek, still a type of fantasy, but you're explaining the science and you always have an explanation. You're kind of limited to some type of physical world. And that was the common theme I saw, where people said, it wasn't so much fantasy, but this is more science fiction in the fact that there's explanations for things, and it keeps it very real and true. Is that why you started in this genre, just because it's interesting, or you had something to say in that space?
I definitely tend to lean in toward hard science fiction, where use real science as much as you can. That intrigues me. I'm from a science background.
Sure.
I write a lot of books that have like robots and coder types in it, and to me, it's like, how would it really work? I want to know how it would work. And a lot of times the science would just present itself when they needed it to. It's sort of one of the miracles of writing. You get into research and it's like, oh yeah, okay, here's how vampires could work, and so so yeah, it's definitely an interest. Science is an interest, but it's kind of a blessing as well, so
Yeah. So a few years ago too, you released the Amish Werewolves of Space, right?
right.
And now
Right.
is that in the same same continuum? And
Yeah, there's actually 3 books. The second book was Amish Zombies
oh,
from
Amish, yep.
Space, and then Amish Werewolves of Space was the third one. And those came to be because I liked the characters so much, and there was more to explore there as far as the science goes. And so I just wanted to know what happened to them. And I started writing it, and got 2
Yeah.
books out of it. So
Yeah. Now, so when I see something like this, and I, like I said, see reviews and read excerpts, and you're keeping it interesting and you're keeping it glorifying to God and clean, I find that to be a huge challenge. I'm a big stand-up comedy fan,
yeah.
and boy, do I love the stand-ups that can they don't shortcut with vulgarness or a cuss word or violence over the top. Your Brian Regans, your Jerry Seinfeld, your Jim Gaffigans, these guys who know how to weave a story, not necessarily that they're trying to keep it clean or quote unquote Christian, but it seems like it's more of a challenge. Is it a challenge in writing to hold fast to your Christian virtues, but also write in a genre which is so full of sex and violence and all these different things that might not be glorifying to God?
Yeah, I guess I don't find that part so much of a challenge because, again, you're kind of writing with a Christian heart. You tend to kind of avoid those things when you write. And for me, like, the story is what's intriguing about it. Is like, how do I make a fascinating story? How do I keep the mystery going? How do I, and the characters sort of drag you along too. Many of them are kind of fallen and they have their own problems, but you don't have to be graphic on the problems, you know what I mean? And so and another thing, driving force for me, is my dad reads everything I write. And
right.
And so I remember growing up and him getting books that he had read and him having whited out some of the swear words in it, and so I don't want him to have to white out my books,
You don't have to
so
white, right.
I try to keep them as clean and while still hopefully constructing a fascinating story,
Sure.
and if you think even in the classic science fiction realm, Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, those masters did not have to go into the woods as far as making it graphic. They told good stories, and that would be my hope, to be like that. So yeah.
Oh, it's a good goal to have. It's funny you say that. I have a mother that listens to every podcast episode, so I have to try to be as nice as possible.
Yes.
Or I'll get a call or a message and go,
right.
Shouldn't be so mean to that person or judge that person so quickly. She keeps me on my toes, so I get it. Do you ever get pushback within the Christian community? Because I grew up, for the first 7-8 years in a very legalistic home, to where it was, you do not listen to rock music, you do not read things about vampires and fantasy and werewolves, and then the second half growing up went to an extremely Pentecostal, to where it was like, hey, everything's almost permissible. I've landed somewhere in the middle where I believe the arts belong to us. God created them for us. We glorify him with that. And I think we should have a lot of leeway within that, as long as it's glorifying to him. But do you ever get pushback within the Christian community when they might scoff and say, oh, vampire, oh, geez, a werewolf, what are, zombie?
Yes.
Actually, how do you deal with that?
Yes. Even actually from, like, my mother-in-law, when she saw Amish vampires, she was like, how could vampires ever be, how could that tell a Christian story? And I said, well, I got to read the book. I know what I wrote and I know why I wrote it. And now her husband are, they read everything I write too. So it's, you do get some of that, and not just me, but kind of the community I'm a part of. It seems like many churches have gotten where arts is kind of something they don't think about, much, kind of side. And I agree with you. I think God gave us an imagination for a reason, and many of the things are very fantastical things in the Bible, and that imagination that is there to help us visualize heaven and what he's got going on. And so yeah, why shouldn't we be using them? Why shouldn't we? And science fiction is such a great way to explore big themes. It's, if done well, you can really, touch on some very interesting things that Christians will appreciate too. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I'm wondering if you agree with me on this, when sometimes I feel like as believers, we focus too much on one particular thing. We almost, we legalize that thing. We say, oh, a zombie or a werewolf or whatever it is, right? A robot with AI. Oh my goodness. When in fact, I can enjoy art on the broad themes of what you're trying to tell your audience, right? I look at like a show like Breaking Bad, for instance, right? A lot of little stuff in there that might not be, quote unquote Christian, but if you look at the overlying theme of that and how his pride ruined him, I don't know if you're familiar with the show or not. And then at the end, admitting that and going, oh, it wasn't for my family. It was for me because I wanted the power, right? There's a very palatable and powerful theme in that you can learn from. And I noticed in a lot of your books, in the reviews I was reading, people were saying the same thing. They're like, we actually appreciate that it just doesn't go right to a gore or violence or something, but it holds true to the character's overarching worldview, like in the Amish series, right? And it does it in a way that teaches the reader and really gets through to the reader. So I'm wondering, sometimes with that kind of criticism or pushback, they're kind of missing the point of art, isn't it? To make us think and giving overarching themes and things like that.
I agree with you. I think that's true, and often, we kind of get locked up in our little box, like church has to be like this, and the only art might be in the stained glass window. Well, God's much bigger than that. I think he gave us the abilities to, use our art and creative instincts to reach the world. So
yeah, absolutely. Let's shift gears here for a little bit. So just because this is going to satisfy my interest, and I know a lot of the listeners are either into books, they read books, they buy books, many have written books. The technical aspect of writing a book for you, where does that start? Does it start with the seed of an idea?
Yes.
Do you have to get so far along before you go, oh, this is going to be a novel, this is going to be a book? And then once it gets there, what are the next steps? Are you scratching stuff down? Are you in a journal? Are you in front of a computer? Do you use a program? Like, where's that first couple months of the maturation of a book come from?
Yeah. Generally, writers break down into, they're either generally plotters or they're pantsers, or like, I like to think of it as organic writers. And I am actually more organic writer. My writing process will usually start with just a few ideas, or maybe a general theme, I want to explore. And like my latest book, for instance, is a book called Lost Bits, and it's a kind of this robot buddy story. And it started just by me opening up in a cabinet one day and seeing all these kind of forgotten e-readers and personal PCs, and thinking, boy, that's kind of sad. These things have been a part of kids' lives, for years, and they've gotten much enjoyment from it. And it's like, well, what if that happened to a robot? He woke up after having been kind of discarded and decided to go look for his family, and so I just kind of started with that idea and sort of followed the character where he went, and the story happened from there, and 80,000 words later, you got a book. Now,
it's that easy, huh? Just 80,000 words later.
Kind of writing is sort of a faith walk for me. You sort of make a habit of it. This is the time I write, and this is how many words I kind of give myself a word goal. This is how many words I want to get done in a day, and then you sit down in that same space that you always sit down in, and start writing. It may not always be Shakespeare, but a lot of times that first draft, especially, it's for getting the ideas out there and kind of exploring the world and not making it perfect necessarily. Now, when I go back, then after I'm done with that first draft, I'll let it sit for a couple weeks to a month, and then read it as a reader, and then that, and usually I print it out on paper because I like to read it that way. And
Mhm.
that draft will be, it'll be redlined everywhere, things I want to change, move around. But that's the time for that second draft. That's when I'm making corrections and trying to fill. Now I know where the book's going. I'm filling in the empty spots and moving things around where they need to be. And then after that, I usually have a pretty solid second draft, and then I'll send it on to somebody else to look at, like an editor or a reader I trust or whatever.
Yeah. So from the time of idea to first draft, what is that time span normally over the average time span over the 15 plus books that you've written?
Yeah, about 9 months.
9 months.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're very habitual about that too. Same place,
Yeah.
same time, kind of tell
Yep.
myself goal setting, write this many words, and
Yep.
be dedicated to that.
Yep. That's how the magic happens. Yep. So, yeah.
Oh, so yeah, so we've covered a lot here, but tell me a little bit more about this new book too, just for the listeners, if they're interested in finding any of your titles. The Lost Bits sounds very interesting. I know you touched on it a little bit, but essentially a discarded robot that,
Right.
And it's so common, right? Like you have that closet full of stuff, and in 50 years, we'll probably have that closet full of robot personal assistants that hasn't been upgraded.
Yes.
That's
the premise. And so he wakes up in a junkyard and doesn't really remember everything. And, obviously the systems aren't working like they used to. And he's sort of, okay, but I remember where they used to live. And I remember what, the daughter I used to take care of, the girl I used to take care of. And so he goes kind of looking for that family, and along the way runs into, a little bit like in the way, in the grain of Wizard of Oz, he kind of runs into other discarded folk and of course some bad folk in there as well. But he basically builds this kind of buddy system of robots and kind of goes looking for his family. So adventure happens, and good things and bad things, and so kind of robot buddy adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are these books, these type of books too, or you think they're all age appropriate? I'm looking at some of these titles, and I would like to get them even for my daughters who are 12 and 10. They do a lot of scholarly reading and historical for homeschool, but you got to throw in some fun ones every once in a while, and they consume them so quickly.
Right.
Even a series, which I'm glad. I encourage that. I think, we need to encourage the next generation to do more reading.
Yeah.
So something like that, if listeners are listening to, you think appropriate for all ages?
Yeah, I tend to write for like 13 above. I think Lost Bits can actually skew a little younger, because again, it's all mechanical, and all the there's not any heavy violence. There's no real romance to speak of, so it's that one probably skews a little younger. I actually, there's a traveling bookstore that I'm kind of associated with through a writers conference that I went to, and we go to lots of homeschooling conventions. I'll meet them there, and so what you're saying there about homeschooling and readers, I've seen it. They'll buy like the stack of what do you got? They'll buy them all and read them all. And often the kids will be back the next day to tell you how much they liked it. I tend to, like I said, write clean fiction and.
So you said something earlier here too, as we wrap this up, that kind of struck a chord with me. We are in a culture of just instant gratification. And if you have a thought, you put it out on Twitter, you put it out on Facebook or Instagram. You said you write a draft and then let it sit for 2 or 3 weeks. And then, and that's 9 months. I just go, in this culture where everything is instant, and it kind of sucks us all in too, to where we speak faster, we say what we want right away, we put it out on social media. Do you ever find that a challenge, to where you're very excited about some art that you're creating or something you're writing, and then you go, I let it sit for 2 or 3 weeks? What's it doing on that mantle over there? You're not showing it to anyone, or you're just letting it ruminate, or is that a challenge?
I don't know if it's like this for all writers, but for me, I have to set it aside for a while. Otherwise I will just hate it. I will hate everything about it, and I don't want it to be that way, so, because you're your worst critic, right? Even after the book's produced, I have a hard time sometimes going back and reading something that I wrote, a year or two ago, because you'll find the little things,
Sure.
So yeah, I need that. Like, I need that time to kind of step away from it. So
So it doesn't bother you then.
no, no.
Actually helps. Cool. So as we wrap this up, if we have any listeners out there that are authors or aspiring authors or want to write a book, what are some things that you might encourage them in or give them some advice?
Uh, First off, like, be persistent, make it a habit. Like
Yeah.
I said before, this is when I'm going to write, and carve out that time. It's going to be your writing time, and just stick to it, and don't expect every word to be perfect. You're blazing a trail through it, is what you're doing. And it's a faith walk. Like I said, it's just one step at a time. And I'd also encourage them to be involved in seek out a writing community that's, the type of genre you like to write, and those people they'll be your best friends. They will encourage you, and you can encourage them, and you'll grow and learn, and you'll connect with people who do book covers and edit and all these tools that you will need down the road. So yeah, those would be my two biggest pieces of advice, I guess. But
Awesome. Kerry, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah.
Throw out the social media links and the website again for the listeners if they want to check you out.
Sure. www.nietz.com, Nietz.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter and MeWe, and if you search for Amish vampires in space, you'll find me. So yeah.
Awesome. And guys, we'll make sure that we link this all up on the YouTube page, the social media, and everywhere it goes out to get your podcast. Kerry, once again, thanks for taking time and being with us today, telling us a little bit more about your journey. Very interesting. Anytime you want to come back on the podcast, or if you have something new out, let us know. You're more than welcome to be here. Yeah. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode. As always, God bless. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Dead Men Walking Podcast for full video podcast episodes and clips, or email us at deadmenwalkingpodcast@gmail.com.
None your biscuit.